Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal. I am your host, Tanya Schrum, and we are joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Welcome to you both. Hope you're having a lovely week so far.
Hey, Tanya.
Yep, so far so good. How about you, Tanya?
I'm doing great and enjoying the holiday season as we go through.
It crept up on us in a hurry, I gotta say.
Yeah, I'm afraid it'll be in our rearview mirror in a hurry as well. So, Thad, would you tell us a bit about what's coming to this week's cover of the North Coast Journal?
Yeah, in this week's cover story, I took a dive into the status of the California prosecutor-led resentencing pilot project, which is a bit of a mouthful. But essentially, it's a pilot project started a couple of years ago that selected 9 counties in California, including Humboldt, and gave them some funding so that their prosecutor's office, our district attorney's office, could go back and review basically the state prison population that came from Humboldt County, that were sentenced in Humboldt County, to see if there's any cases that warrant resentencing. So the idea was the project first came a change in California law in 2018, spearheaded by Hillary Blount, who is a former prosecutor in San Francisco County and went on to form the nonprofit organization For the People, which is trying to reduce the state's prison population. And talking to her, it was really clear that, her idea behind this became, that California for a couple decades now has suffered with prison overcrowding. And even though our prison population is greatly reduced from what it was, it's still beyond kind of the capacity of the physical structures that house inmates. And then, the state has also put a renewed emphasis on rehabilitation and kind of with the insight, maybe not surprising, that incarceration is both extremely expensive. It costs $100,000 a year to incarcerate an inmate in California. And it's also, has these reverberating impacts on people, on families, on communities. And so wherever possible, wherever safe for the public, it's kind of in the best interest of the state to release people and get them out of federal custody out of state custody and back, contributing to their communities. So Hillary kind of realized that, that this state laws have changed a lot in the last 5 to 10 years to kind of shift away from really punitive, almost draconian sentencing policies with mandatory minimums, with and stuff like that, to policies that are a little bit more lenient or more progressive, or really prioritize incarceration for, very serious and violent felonies, but reduce penalties for other crimes, and kind of do away with some of the mandatory enhancements that were really popular for a period. So, for instance, there used to be a mandatory firearm enhancement that would carry an additional 10-year penalty for certain crimes if they were committed with a firearm. So what she realized is that while state law had shifted a lot, that hadn't really trickled back to the state's inmate population. And there was lots of people serving time and serving significant sentences in state prison who would have been sentenced much differently had they committed those crimes today and been tried today. And so her idea behind this project was that prosecutors are, duly elected officials in the counties where they're from. They have, the district attorneys anyway, and they have a kind of a unique insight into both the climate of their county, what their communities will deem kind of acceptable or appropriate, and they also have kind of a unique insight, or should have a unique insight, into the prison population that has come from their county, having been theoretically, involved in a lot of those cases. And so she got this law passed in in 2018 that allows prosecutors to kind of resentence or petition a court to resentence individuals on their own motion, but then realized that not a lot was happening with that new law. Not a lot of district attorney's offices were kind of taking advantage of it or using it. And she kind of, after doing some research, figured that that was largely because the offices weren't built to do this, and they didn't have the resources to do this. And so she then lobbied the legislature to appropriate funding for this pilot project, which it did in 2021. And the reason I started really kind of looking into this is it came to my attention that Humboldt has kind of the distinction of being the only of these 9 counties that so far has not seen an inmate resentenced. And so I was curious just to try to find out more about kind of what's happening in Humboldt and how this program is and isn't being used locally.
And based on what you found, what were some of the reasons that it seems like we haven't taken advantage of this opportunity?
Well, there's a few. I don't have a great answer to that. Other than that, this is entirely a prosecutor-driven process, and so it's really dependent on the desire of the prosecutor's office to kind of fully throw themselves into it. So, in addition to us not having resentenced an inmate, our district attorney's office has only seriously reviewed 3 cases to consider resentencing. Each of those was forwarded to it by this nonprofit For the People that kind of did the initial legwork to identify an inmate that potentially would warrant resentencing. And the district attorney's office has only spent about $57,000 of the $355,000 it was allocated 2 years ago for this 3-year pilot project. So really just kind of a fraction of the funds. The Rand Corporation, which is kind of doing an ongoing evaluation of the effectiveness of the program to see if it's something that should be expanded throughout the state, issued a kind of a 2-year report and identified some of the challenges that prosecutors' offices were facing in implementing it. And that report really found that offices that devoted resources to this effort and kind of put together a specialized team that was, kind of solely tasked or significantly tasked with doing this work, as opposed to kind of putting it on as a little extra on existing employees' plates, that those offices kind of found the most success. And Humboldt has not done that. Stacey Eads, our district attorney, it seems like from the attorney perspective, handling this work herself, with the help of an analyst and an office manager, neither of which it seems were hired specifically to do this work. So that's one, I think, big piece. The other is that the criteria that our district attorney put together of who would qualify for this resentencing program, it was up to each county to put together its own criteria, is, pretty prohibitive. It prohibits kind of serious and violent felony offenses, sex offenses, and kind of any crime of domestic violence, any crime where the victim is a peace officer. And it also gives victims in the cases basically kind of the power to deny a petition for resentencing. It says a victim's objection to going forward with the resentencing petition would be, prohibitive. So, keeping in mind kind of the changes in state law and stuff, there aren't a ton of people who are serving significant prison sentences for nonviolent offenses. So that really kind of weeds out a ton of potential cases on its own. And then I thought it was telling. I asked Ms. Eads directly kind of why it seemed like Humboldt County was having problems or having challenges identifying potential candidates for this program. And I thought her response was somewhat telling, in that she said, this program is not a requirement, it's an opportunity. And kind of indicated that it wasn't something that she felt tremendously compelled to do and review all of the almost 400 cases that are currently, or cases of inmates who are currently in state prison from Humboldt County.
No, I appreciate that. That was kind of the feeling I got reading the story. So I was wondering if that was kind of the feeling that was coming across.
Yeah, I mean it's clear from seeing what's going on in other counties. I mean, some counties have, have, for instance, if Yolo County has already reviewed 16% of the cases of its inmate population. In contrast, Humboldt County, I think, is 0.8%. So it's just clear that there's a real discrepancy or disparity in how different prosecutors are approaching this work, and some are really utilizing the funds made available to them to hire people to really proactively take this on as an opportunity, and others are not. And yeah.
Well, do you have any final thoughts about this story before we move on to the other news article?
Yeah, I guess just kind of moving the story forward, I'd say that our public defender's office is taking a proactive role in as a part of the pilot project. Each public defender's office in the 9 counties was also given some funding to kind of assist and help with this work, even though they don't really have any authority to put forward cases to the court to consider resentencing. But our public defender's office hired an investigator and has been really actively both fielding inquiries from inmates' families who think they might qualify and kind of doing the legwork to review those cases, but then also going through, independently going through the state's prison population from Humboldt County to review cases. And so they feel like they have identified, I think they said 3 really strong candidates for resentencing, and they're putting together kind of portfolios, basically arguing the case that these inmates should be resentenced to present to the district attorney, and they're hoping that that will happen in the next couple of weeks. And so we'll see, if there's any movement on those cases that are brought forward, and if the DA kind of deems that they meet criteria and are worth bringing to the court.
Right. Thank you for that story, Thad. I definitely appreciate having strong criteria for such a program, but I also don't appreciate it being kind of sounding like it's dismissed out of hand. So I appreciate your reporting on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So would we like to speak on the news article that's also coming to the North Coast Journal this
Yeah,
week?
we also have a story by digital editor Kimberly Weir following up on her ongoing coverage of the controversy surrounding the Earth Flag on Top initiative, Measure M, passed by Arcata voters, that now has the Earth flag flying on city-owned flagpoles above the U.S. flag and above the state of California flag. So when that initiative passed, it passed with about 52% of the vote. The city, kind of made clear that it felt conflicted. The initiative, as a voter passed initiative, the city is kind of mandated by state law to uphold it and to enact it. But this particular initiative requires the city to do something that is in violation of the U.S. and state flag codes and other provisions that state that the U.S. flag shall fly atop all others. So as the city had previously kind of explained to us, it felt like it was between a legal rock and a legal hard place, and would kind of be in violation of the law no matter whether it enacted this initiative or whether it chose not to. And kind of fearing liability or a lawsuit, said that it would kind of proactively go to a judge, a local superior court judge, and kind of ask for clarity on the situation. And so what the city has done is actually petition the court to find that the measure is in violation of state law, and therefore the city shouldn't have to comply. And would, if successful, the city's effort would then move that Earth flag back down to the bottom rung.
It's definitely some interesting information to read if you've never heard of flag codes, and learn about that.
It is. I think it's a fascinating legal question, that gets into free speech rights. Whether a voter passed initiative can be an act of free speech. I think it's interesting that, the Supreme Court of the United States has upheld flag burning as a constitutionally protected free speech right. And so, proponents of Measure M say, well, if we can burn a flag, we should be able to put it on top of the flagpole too. So it'll be interesting to see how far it goes. Some legal scholars that we consulted with, or that Kim consulted with, have said, this really could be a kind of a precedent-setting Supreme Court case if it makes it that far, just because it does raise some really novel and interesting legal arguments.
Absolutely. Well, Thad, thank you for reporting on that story, and thank you to Kim for writing it. I encourage everyone to pick up a copy of the North Coast Journal and read both these stories for themselves. And with that, we will turn to the wonderful Jennifer and find out what's what's happening this week on the Arts and Features beat.
So before we started recording, Tanya and I were talking about her career as a trivia contestant. One of the many people, I did not know what a huge trivia scene there was at Fieldbrook Market.
Oh, yes.
And I also did not know about the tuna melt, which I kind of blame you. I don't know. But
you're right.
Lots of people, Tanya included, I'm told, were devastated last week to hear that the Fieldbrook Market would be closing. It's the Fieldbrook Market and Eatery, and it's more than that, actually. I want to say first, before you panic, before you grab your go bag and leave the county, it is temporarily closing. So we'll get into that in a minute. But Fieldbrook Market is a grocery store. It is a restaurant. It is a music venue, place for trivia, a place where you can have a post office box and pay your bills. And it's a community hub where people connect to each other during like blackouts and things like that. Fieldbrook Market is kind of the central hub for Fieldbrook. And Fieldbrook is, within Arcata, I believe, but it's technically, but it is its own little community and really apart and rural. And so it's really important. There's not a lot else around there in terms of, being able to get a meal, get groceries, etc. You've got to drive out in order to do that. So I spoke this week with Lisa Springer, who, with her husband Clark, owns the Fieldbrook Market and Eatery. And we talked about how she got started there and also what the plans are for the future. So again, relax a little bit. The market is, as far as Lisa is concerned, not closing forever. What it is they're having a lot of trouble figuring out how to make the model work. Partly because costs have gone up. Everything from electricity, she was telling me, to the costs of goods. To run a little market like that and not have to like throw out produce and things like that, she has to pay surcharges for ordering smaller amounts and having smaller deliveries made. So there are a lot of things that get more expensive. And everybody knows, as she put it to me, she was like, I don't want to complain because everybody's going through this. But this is what I'm hearing from pretty much all restaurant owners, right? Everybody's having to find a way to pull back, to pinch, cut hours, do what they have to make up for the increase in cost of goods. And especially, even as inflation, may slow down in other parts of the country, just like we've seen with gas prices, they fall elsewhere. And we're like the last ones to see the price go down. And Lisa was telling me, she's like, I get it. I sympathize with people, of course, people in Fieldbrook, it's convenient and it's cheaper for them to come here because of, the distance of driving. But people coming up from Arcata, people coming from McKinleyville, Eureka, elsewhere, are you going to drive all the way to Fieldbrook? We're all having to make these decisions. And, right now with gas at a premium, it's kind of hard to maybe stick to your usual routine for entertainment and things like that. So there were a lot of things that contributed to a dip in sales, which they expect every winter, but it was a bigger dip coming earlier. And she and Clark looked at it and said, you know what, we need to take a step back. So this is very much hopefully a temporary, temporary pause on the business so that they can kind of do some restructuring, figure out how to make things work. Interestingly, the grocery business, because lots of people say, oh, but it's always packed and they have groceries and stuff. The grocery business is not like a big earner. Probably, I'm gonna guess that another owner might decide, oh, we're not gonna have groceries anymore. But because the Springers know that this is really important, and the folks, the Costas who owned it before, and I think previous owners have also understood that having groceries available, just like essentials and snacks, is vital for the community there. So they don't want to let that go because they know it means a lot to folks there. The same thing with some of the other services they offer. Things like events, having bands there, having trivia night, having pop-up dinners, which they've been doing a lot of pop-ups. And I was like excited to go try a pop-up soon. And then I saw the message on Facebook and I too was like, but those nights when there are events or, special goings on, those are big nights, but they don't necessarily make up for really slow times when they have to be open because people need milk and eggs, but they aren't necessarily making the kind of money that helps them pay the bills or, break even. And I think that that's something that I have, over the years learned about restaurants in Humboldt and other businesses too, but for sure restaurants, is that we have this idea of who's doing really well because we see lots of, full chairs. And that could be, a retail place where you see lots of people shopping, or you see, lots of people in a cafe. And then it turns out that it's just the overhead is too much, or, something makes it really difficult. And being in a remote place, there are some extra challenges for us. So, don't take those places for granted.
No, and you are absolutely right. It's a very quaint community, and I knew that this was going to be hard for all of those residents, that now we're going to have to drive 15 minutes to get some milk and bread.
Right. And it's tough. We've seen other parts of Humboldt County that are really in a food desert, right? And it might not seem like a big deal if you have to drive 15 minutes to get groceries and such, but that's if you are, an able-bodied person with full mobility, and, maybe you're not older, maybe your car's always in great working shape. The more obstacles you have in front of you, the more important these little shops really become for you. I was also intrigued by Lisa Springer's obsession with ramen. She just became obsessed. Like, she tried it and she was like, oh. And then after that, she just started obsessing over it, trying it everywhere she went, and then teaching herself to make it. And she took a long time to kind of get to where she felt like, okay, it's ready to sell it. And she's been doing it recently, and it's been very popular. Apparently, it's been selling out, and I see lots of posts on social media about it, and, it's got a real following. So the hope is that while they are on hiatus with the shop being, closed, they are still going to offer ramen noodles through delivery or pickup. And she's working out the logistics of that, which are tricky for hot noodle soup. But she's got a plan and she's working on it. So stay tuned for that. And also, because, again, it's like a community thing, on Friday, the 15th, I believe, they're still going to do their big Santa Claus coming to town day with like cookies and cocoa. And I think the Lost Dogs are playing. So there'll be a time for the community to get together and, share any ideas, I guess. If you're some sort of a business genius and you've got a great idea for the market, don't keep it to yourself.
Definitely step up and buy some ramen and let's get that market back open. This is a song that's being sung way too much in the county, and we want to see less businesses going up and not under. But
and good news for you, Tanya. The miso soup that's going to be on offer on the 15th is going to be mushroom miso ramen.
Oh, so, yeah.
Right up your alley.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. That's going to wrap up our time for this week. The current edition of the North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick up your copy or, of course, find it online at northcoastjournal.com. I am Tanya Schrum. Thanks for being with us and staying informed and supportive of our North Coast community. Thanks, everyone.